Today we're going to talk about something really important, the story of the Irob people. Now you might not have heard of them, but they're a community that's been caught for decades, literally, in the crossfire between Ethiopia and Eritrea. It's a powerful story about how lines on a map, just lines, can completely shatter lives. And it raises a huge question. What happens to the people who get forgotten once the fighting officially stops?
And this quote? Wow, it just gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it? The real, lasting pain of this whole conflict, it wasn't just about soldiers fighting soldiers. No. It was about what happened to the civilians. These unspeakable abuses, that's the kind of trauma that doesn't just vanish when a peace treaty is signed. It sticks around. It echoes for generations.
So a huge part of that pain comes from a specific crime, and it has a name: forced disappearance. Now look closely at that definition, especially the last part, outside the protection of the law. That is so important. This isn't just someone going missing. It's when a government or an armed group makes someone disappear and then denies it. They basically erase them, creating this legal black hole. And for the families left behind, it's a special kind of agony, because they can't get any answers.
Which leads us right to the central question we're trying to unpack today. In the middle of this huge war between two countries, what actually happened to the Irob people?
All right, let's dive in. Our story really kicks off during the border war that blew up between 1998 and 2000. Now, for the Irob, you have to understand this wasn't some abstract conflict they saw in the news. This was an invasion of their homes, their land. It was an event that was going to leave a scar that's still there today.
97. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's how many innocent Irob civilians are on the record as being forcibly disappeared by Eritrean forces during that war. And look, this isn't just a statistic, right? Every single one of those numbers represents a person, a father, a brother, a community leader who one day was there and the next was just gone.
And who were these people? Well, they weren't soldiers. They weren't combatants. They were the very fabric of their community. We're talking about heads of families, farmers, people raising cattle, religious leaders, just ordinary people. Their only crime, if you can even call it that, was living on land that overnight turned into a battlefield.
And to make this even more real, let's just pull two names from that list of 97. Adeyu Mirises Meshfu and Tsege Miris Tesfu. They were brothers. Two brothers from the same family who disappeared. Just imagine that. And you have to remember, for every single one of those 97 names, there's a story of loss just as devastating as this one.
Okay, so how did this even happen? To get that, we need to pull back from the personal stories for a moment and look at the bigger picture, the politics that set the stage for all of this. So after the fighting stopped, the international community got involved. They set up something called the Eritrea-Ethiopia Boundary Commission. You can see the representatives here. It was basically this formal, high-level group with people from both Ethiopia and Eritrea, and their job was to sit down and figure out, legally, where the border should be once and for all.
And this timeline here really breaks it down for us. You've got the war starting in 98. Then in 2000, they signed an agreement to stop the hostilities. And then, just 2 years later in 2002, that Boundary Commission we just talked about comes out with its final decision. It's legally binding. So, on paper, it looks like the problem is solved.
But, and this is a huge but, for the Irob people, this legal decision that was supposed to bring peace, it actually made things worse in some ways. It created even more uncertainty and left their most painful questions completely unanswered.
And here is the absolute tragic irony of this whole situation. You've got all these diplomats and lawyers in a room somewhere, arguing over lines on a map. And while they're doing that, the massive human cost, the actual people affected, just gets ignored. The border gets decided, sure, but what about the 97 people who vanished? Their fate wasn't on the agenda.
So why were they overlooked? Well, the reason is kind of buried in legal procedure, but the result is just devastating. Basically, the whole claims process was set up for governments to make claims against other governments. It wasn't designed for individual people. So while Ethiopia was filing claims against Eritrea for war damages, it seems like the specific cases for these disappeared Irob civilians just fell through the cracks. For their families, there was literally no official path to get answers or justice. None.
If the story ended right there, it would be heartbreaking enough. But it doesn't, because history in this part of the world has this absolutely brutal way of repeating itself. So now, let's jump forward 2 decades, to 2020.
Just look at this comparison. It is absolutely chilling. Fast forward to the Tigray War in 2020, and it's like a horrible echo of the past. Eritrean forces are once again involved in Irob land. Irob civilians are once again facing displacement, horrible atrocities, and total devastation. It's like the unresolved trauma from 20 years ago just came roaring back as a new, brutal reality.
And this quote from back during the First War, it's really revealing. What Professor Legaeus is saying here is that Eritrea occupied the Irob region not because they thought the land was theirs, but for strategic reasons, for battle strategy. Think about that. The Irob people weren't caught in the middle of a land dispute. They were caught in the middle of a tactical chess move.
Now, jump forward to 2020, and just listen to this. It's almost the same cry for help. The Irob Advocacy Association is putting out this statement, condemning a new wave of violations and demanding an independent investigation. It's the exact same thing they needed 2 decades earlier and never really got.
But I want to be really clear about something. This is not just a story about suffering. It can't be. It's also a story of incredible resilience. It's about a community and its allies fighting with everything they have to make sure this history is not erased.
And that fight really comes to life in people like Rita Alamakasai. I mean, get this. She was studying to be a chemical engineer in Europe when the war broke out in 2020. All of a sudden, she couldn't reach her family back home. So what did she do? She dropped everything, her studies, her life there, and went to refugee camps in Sudan to start documenting the atrocities, to record the stories of survivors.
And Rita's incredible work is part of this bigger mission for justice. It's a strategy with a few key parts. First, you have to document everything, get the stories, record the evidence. Then you have to help the people on the ground, so they're fundraising and delivering aid. Next, you appeal to the world, talking to big international bodies like the UN and the EU. And finally, you just advocate. You fight relentlessly for recognition and for justice for a community that the world has tried to forget.
So this brings us full circle, right back to the people caught in between. And it leaves us with this huge, lingering question. When the war is officially end, when the treaties are all signed and the maps are redrawn, who is actually responsible for the people left behind? Who speaks for those who've disappeared? Who answers for the lives that were completely shattered by a simple line on a map?